I never knew my biological father. My mother was left alone with me, struggling to make ends meet with her job as a waitress in a diner. We lived in a small apartment in a very poor neighborhood. She did her best to provide for me, but it was hard. She was always tired and stressed, and we barely had enough money for food and rent. But my mother was a strong woman, and she never gave up hope. Even after my father had died in a car accident when I was a baby, she always told me that one day things would get better and that one day we would have enough to eat and sleep well. She believed that one day she would meet someone like my father with whom she could share the happiness and sorrows of life. When I was 5 years old, John entered our lives. John was a regular customer at the diner where my mother worked. He was a tall and handsome man with a very friendly demeanor. I remember him wearing a suit and tie, and he always carried a briefcase with him. My 5-year-old brain used to think that he was someone important and successful, which turned out to be true. He always ordered the same thing, coffee and toast. He always sat at the same table, the one by the window. He always smiled at my mother when she served him, a warm and friendly smile. He also noticed me, as on most days I used to sit at the counter waiting for my mother to finish her shift. I had nothing to do but watch the people and the cars outside. Sometimes John would wave at me or wink at me or make funny faces at me to make me laugh. One day, while I was having lunch with my mother, John came in and asked us if he could join us. She agreed, and he sat next to me on the stool. That was the first time I met him up close. He asked me my name, my age, and my interests. He introduced himself and explained about his job and his hobbies. It was a fun conversation, and it was very warm. He was a lawyer working for a big firm downtown. He was an avid reader and golfer. I liked him right away because of how sweet he was to my mom and me. He came back the next day, and the next day. Then he started to bring me gifts each time he came to the diner. He made sure to engage in conversations with me. He would ask me about every aspect of my life, like school, friends, or even comic books. When I talked, he always listened to me with interest and respect. By this time, he was good friends with my mother. He asked her out on a date, and she said yes. The date went well, and within a few weeks they fell in love. I could see how happy my mother was after John entered our lives. He truly made my mother happy. During this time, John told us that he was a divorcee and he had a son, Mark, from his previous marriage. From the way he talked, it was clear that John and Mark did not get along well, even though Mark was still a child. Within the next few months, he asked my mom to marry him, and she said yes. I still remember the ring that he bought my mother, as it had a big diamond that sparkled in the light. After marriage, we moved to his house, which was huge compared to the apartment where we lived. It had a big yard and a tall white fence. He had a car with leather seats, air conditioning, and a sunroof. All these were very novel to me, as I had lived in poverty during my first few years of childhood. John gave us more than everything we ever wanted and showered us with love. He loved my mother with all his heart. He treated her like a queen and loved me like his own daughter. He was patient, supportive, protective of me. So it was easy for me to love him back, like he was my father. My stepbrother Mark was older than me by 10 years, and he hated John. He blamed him for his parents' divorce, and he resented him for moving on and marrying my mother. But in reality, John's first wife was a toxic and manipulative woman. That was the reason why John ended the marriage. Mark was manipulated by his mother into believing that John was the villain. So Mark never visited John or called to inquire about him. From the brief interaction I had with Mark, I felt like he was selfish and bitter, and I hated him. I met Mark for the first time at John and my mother's wedding. He was the only one who didn't look happy for them. He had a black expression on his face throughout the ceremony. He didn't cheer for them or hug them. He just stood there with his arms crossed and his eyes cold. He didn't even smile at me. He just looked at me with disdain and disgust. He made me feel like I didn't belong there, like I was an intruder. He didn't stay for the reception or dance and left without saying goodbye as soon as the ceremony was over. He never came back to visit John again. John never stopped trying to reach out to him. He called him every week, sent him cards every birthday, and invited him every holiday. He made all efforts to be a good father to him, to show him that he still loved him and cared about him. He tried to make him part of our family, to include him in our lives. But Mark rarely responded to the calls or messages. He never sent a card or a gift back to John. He never accepted his invitations or showed up to stay with us. He ignored his father and rejected our family. I could see the pain in John's eyes every time he hung up the phone or checked the mailbox or set the table. I could see how much he wanted to connect with his son, mend their relationship, and heal their wounds. But John never gave up hope. He told me that one day things would get better and Mark would come around to reconcile. But that day never came. Soon, John was diagnosed with cancer, which left us devastated. He had only a few months to live, and I wanted to make them as comfortable and happy as possible. I quit my job and moved back home and devoted myself to taking care of him. I cooked for him, read to him, played music for him, and tried to do everything I could to make him smile, even when he was in pain. John was not afraid to die, but there was something that still bothered him, his relationship with Mark. We informed Mark about John's condition, hoping that he would finally care enough to visit him or call him or at least send him a card. We hoped that he would realize that this was his last chance to say goodbye to his father and apologize for his behavior. But he didn't respond to our efforts. He ignored his dying father and he broke his heart. John passed away peacefully in his sleep one night. I was by his side holding his hand. He looked calm and serene as if he had no regrets. I kissed his forehead and whispered goodbye. We had a few months to come to terms with the reality that John would die. So his death, though painful, was expected. We were thankful that it ended his suffering. The day after John's death, Mark came home. He barged into the house acting like he owned the place. He demanded to see the will, to claim his inheritance, to take what he thought was his. He didn't even want to look at John's body before the funeral. He didn't even say a word of condolence to my mother or me. He was too late. John had changed his will a few weeks before he died. He left everything to my mother and me and nothing to Mark. He said he wanted to reward us for our love and care and to punish Mark for his neglect and cruelty. Mark was furious. He screamed and cursed at us, calling us names and accusing us of stealing from him. He threatened to sue us and ruin our lives. He said we were not his family and that we had no right to anything. My mother thought that we should share the inheritance with Mark, but I hated his attitude and kicked him out of the property. Then we held John's funeral in peace. Am I the a-hole for kicking out my stepbrother from our house, for asking for his share of the father's inheritance while he neglected his father throughout his life? Update 1. We have been getting hate texts from Mark's mother's relatives. They're calling me and my mother thieves for stealing the inheritance. My mother is deeply disturbed by all this, but I'm planning to stick to John's will and have everything as he mentioned in the will. Update 2. A week has passed and now they are bullying us less. But my mom still feels like it's selfish for us to have all of her husband's wealth. Since she pushed me to do it, I contacted Mark through my father's lawyer to discuss a settlement of the issue, but he responded very disrespectfully and even ordered us to transfer all the wealth to his name as we didn't deserve any of it. I cut the communication with him immediately and let my mother know his response. So that's over for now. Update 3. I felt like there was a need to get back at Mark for his arrogance. He had the guts to make his relatives bully us online. So I went online and posted on Facebook about how Mark had ignored John in the past. It was an elaborate post in which I attached screenshots of my text exchanges with John where he mentioned how painful it was for him. I think people must know the truth about Mark, or else we'll go down as the people who tried to steal his inheritance. NTA, your stepbrother deserved that treatment. From your account, it feels like he suffers from some sort of narcissistic disorder. It's always better to keep such people away. NTA, there's clearly only one villain here, and that's your stepbrother. He might have dreamed of walking away with all the wealth after ignoring his father for years. But sadly, that's not how the world works. At least now, he'll learn that there are consequences to his actions. Next story. The short story is we're going on 2 years together. 2 blissful years, truly. But tonight sucks. I love her. And if things keep going this way, excluding tonight, I want to marry her. That said, I'm currently drugged up with Benadryl, trying to sleep off hives and itchiness, and have blocked her mother and brothers. I have a peanut allergy. My girlfriend loves peanut butter, like kill an entire jar in a day sort of love. I know the irony. We don't go out every night and we don't live together. All I really ask of her is that she doesn't have any peanut butter products right before our dates, or if she does, to brush her teeth and wash her hands at least. When I picked her up tonight, there were a bunch of Reese's wrappers in the trash bin, but she promised that she'd washed up, so we went on our date like we planned. I started to itch during it, but held off saying much of anything. But it's now covering most of my hands, my arms, my neck, and my lips and cheeks. Since getting home, I've taken some allergy meds, scrubbed down in the shower, and laid down on fresh blankets, but I'm still itching like hell. My girlfriend texted me good night, but because I was frustrated, I replied, "It would have been a better night if you'd bothered to wash your hands after having a bunch of Reese's." She got mad that I was policing her food intake and calling her dirty. Now she has her mother and brothers demanding to know why suddenly it was so bad with her when everyone I could ever interact with eats peanuts. And it could have been them and not girlfriend that caused my reaction. Edit to say. I also said, do I have to ask if the wedding cake will have peanut butter? And should I just assume I need to take medication just to kiss you? So I really was a bit of a dick. Edit again, but I am a little loopy from Benadryl. I realize now, so I apologize in advance. NTA, I'm going to be blunt. I doubt you and she have a future together. To be with you, she will eventually have to give up peanut butter, peanuts, and all related products. It doesn't sound like she cares enough about you to do something like that. And washing hands is such a low bar. NTA, you have a legitimate medical issue with peanuts. Your girlfriend seemingly disregarded it. Perhaps someone could quibble and say you could use more sensitivity and tact, but the reality is that you're riding out an anaphylactic reaction, so your mood isn't going to be super great. I know what those feel like, bee stings. Beyond the immediate issue of whether or not you're an a-hole, I think you need to examine this relationship on a more fundamental level. You're talking about marrying a person who willfully, and in a very literal sense, put your life in danger over a food product. Given this dynamic, is she willing to keep a nut-free household when you're married? Is having children together something you've considered? A fair bit of research suggests there is a hereditary element to such allergies. Will she endanger your children in a similar manner? After 2 years together, I think these are some very legitimate and fundamental questions you need to be asking. Next story. My husband, 35, male, and I, 29, female, got married and bought a house together this year. We keep our finances relatively separate. We have a shared bank account that we contribute equally to, but only for household expenses. Everything else is kept in our own accounts, and we don't really care what the other person spends their own money on. He makes about $100,000 a year. I make about $90,000 a year. We purchased a house for $575,000 with a 5.79 interest rate. Yikes. But put $225,000 down. He did $100,000. I did $125,000. We're pretty frugal, though, and plan to massively overpay and pay this off within 5 to 7 years. Recently, a friend passed very suddenly at a young age, 33, and it's kind of jolted us a little bit and made us realize that it can really kind of happen to anybody. We've started having a lot of conversations about the future and what we would do if something like that were to happen. Both of us have 401ks. Mine has about $125,000 in it. His has about $170,000. Because we're married, the other person is entitled to that money should one of us die. But there is an option to sign a waiver allowing them to give it to somebody else. I obviously want that money to go to him to help with the massive mortgage we currently have. Last week, he asked me to sign a waiver that would allow him to give his 401k to his parents instead. He said my finances are relatively secure, and he doesn't see how I would have an issue paying off the mortgage in the unlikely situation of him dying in the next 7 years. I feel uncomfortable with this and feel like it's not fair for me to sign that and put myself in a vulnerable position when you truly never know. His parents own their own home outright and are secure enough at their age that the extra money won't make or break them. My husband also has a life insurance policy that will go to them as he never put my name on it. I have absolutely no issue with this, and it hasn't been part of this argument. My husband's parents now think I'm an a-hole and a gold digger, even though we've always had a really great relationship, and my husband is tremendously upset with me because I refuse to sign this form. So, am I the a-hole? Edit. I think separate finances was bad wording. I just meant we have our own bank accounts for extras, like I use mine for birthday gifts for him, trips to Starbucks, and nights out with the girls. Other than that, though, we do have combined finances. We split the mortgage 50-50, although he's paying more to catch up to me right now. Everything else comes out of the combined account, too. Car insurance, phone bills, travel expenses, Christmas gifts for family. Sorry for the bad wording, but we do contribute equally to our life together, and this is the first time we've ever had a hang-up about anything financially. NTA. He's not an a-hole for asking you, but he is an a-hole for not accepting your answer and telling his parents and getting them stirred up. Part of being a married couple is growing together and not leaving your life partner in a disadvantaged position if you can at all help it. You have a massive mortgage. It would be irresponsible of him to remove you as the beneficiary of his 401k before that mortgage is cleared. I would counter and tell him that if the mortgage is clear and the house is owned outright in 7 years, then you can revisit the issue. But until then, no. Because should something happen to him, you shouldn't be entirely responsible for the costs of a home you mutually agreed to buy, and his parents have the equity in their own home and would have his life insurance too. Or you can tell him that you have had a rethink and you will also leave your 401k to someone else, and if you predecease your husband, he can struggle to pay the mortgage. NTA, I find it bizarre that he would get his family involved in something that should be between the two of you. He actually told his parents about you and damaged your relationship with them. That doesn't sound like he's thinking long term to me. What husband wants his parents to dislike his wife? The parents' reaction is bad news also. The prospect of money seems to be more important to them than the health of their son's marriage. They've contentiously labeled you a gold digger. How do you put that insult back in the bottle? Also, your finances aren't really separate if you purchased a home together. You may have your own incomes and accounts, but you've taken on a large debt together and need to pay it off together, even if one of you passes away. There's much bigger problems here. I hope you find a solution that gives you peace of mind. Think about talking this over with a therapist. NTA 100%. Federal laws make you entitled to that money, so I don't blame you for not wanting to sign. It feels odd to me that you have your 401k designated to him and you're okay with it, but your husband doesn't want that. And he has a life insurance policy with his parents as beneficiaries, something doesn't sound right. Also, his parents need to stay the frick out because, as his spouse, you are entitled to this money. They are not. They sound like they are hunting for cash. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.